In 1978, Holocaust brought one of history's darkest tragedies to television. But for some of its actors, the tragedy didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Some faced heartbreaking struggles during filming. Others passed away not long after the series ended. Join us as we look back at who they were and honor the legacy they left behind. Fritz Weaver, as Dr. Joseph Weiss. Fritz William Weaver was born on January 19, 1926 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, United States. At 52 years old, he played Dr. Joseph Weiss, the compassionate Jewish doctor and father struggling to protect his family in Holocaust, 1978. The role became one of the emotional pillars of the series, giving the tragedy of the Weiss family a human face that audiences could not forget. That quiet authority on screen hid a turbulent personal life. Weaver married actress Sylvia Short in 1953, and for years they appeared to be a stable theatrical couple raising two children, Lydia and Anthony. But the reality behind the curtain was harsher. Long theater tours and constant filming slowly poisoned the marriage. By the late 1970s, the relationship collapsed, ending in a painful divorce in 1979, right when Weaver was gaining recognition from Holocaust. Even while appearing in films like Marathon Man, 1976, and later Creepshow, 1982, he was still carrying the emotional wreckage of a family breaking apart. The strain did not stop there. Years of relentless stage work and pressure began to erode his health. Weaver developed serious cardiovascular problems, forcing him to slow down after decades of non-stop performance. Yet he continued voice narration and occasional acting projects, determined to remain creatively active even as his body struggled to keep pace. Fritz Weaver died on November 26, 2016, at his home in New York City at the age of 90, reportedly from complications following surgery. He left behind two children and a long artistic legacy shaped by theater, film, and television. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $3 million, earned through more than 60 years of acting. His portrayal of Dr. Joseph Weiss remains one of the most haunting performances in the miniseries. Sam Wanamaker as Moses Weiss. Samuel Wanamaker was born on June 14, 1919, in Chicago, Illinois, United States. At 59 years old, he played Moses Weiss, the wise and stubborn patriarch of the Weiss family in Holocaust, 1978. His performance gave the series emotional depth, portraying a man clinging to faith and tradition while his world collapsed around him. Off-screen, Wanamaker's relationships were just as dramatic as any script. He married Canadian actress Charlotte Holland in 1940, but the marriage eventually broke under the strain of political exile and career uncertainty. Years later, he began a controversial relationship with Hollywood actress Jan Sterling, which stirred rumors and tension in theater circles. At the same time, he was appearing in films like Private Benjamin, 1980, and directing stage productions, juggling public success with a complicated private life. Then came the illness that slowly closed the final act of his story. Decades of heavy smoking caught up with him, and Wanamaker was diagnosed with lung cancer. Even while fighting the disease, he kept working on his lifelong dream, rebuilding Shakespeare's Globe Theatre in London. Friends recalled that he continued meetings and fundraising sessions even as his health visibly declined. Sam Wanamaker died in London on December 18, 1993, at the age of 74 from lung cancer. The cruel twist is that he never lived to see the official opening of the Globe Theatre in 1997, the project that consumed years of his life. He left behind 3 daughters, including actress Zoe Wanamaker, and an artistic legacy that stretched across stage and screen. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at around $5 million, but the theater that now bears his name stands as a far greater monument than money ever could. David Warner as Reinhard Heydrich. David Hattersley Warner was born on July 29, 1941, in Manchester, England. At 37 years old, he played Reinhard Heydrich, the chilling architect of the Nazi final solution in Holocaust, 1978. His icy performance made the character terrifyingly real and helped give the miniseries its darkest edge. That sinister authority on screen contrasted sharply with the chaos in his private life. Warner married Harriet Lindgren in 1969, but the marriage cracked quickly under the pressure of his rising career and ended in divorce in 1972. Years later, he married Sheila Kent in 1979, and they welcomed a daughter in 1982. Yet the relationship slowly deteriorated as Warner's work kept him moving between productions like The Omen, 1976, and Tron, 1982. The marriage finally collapsed in 2005, leaving the actor emotionally exhausted. In 2006, he found companionship again with actress Lisa Bowerman, who remained his partner until the end of his life. Behind that steady career, Warner was quietly fighting a more frightening enemy. Years of heavy work schedules and smoking began to erode his health, and doctors eventually diagnosed him with cancer roughly 18 months before his death. Even while battling the disease, he continued recording voice roles and making appearances, determined not to vanish quietly after decades of performances in films like Titanic, 1997, and countless television productions. David Warner died on July 24, 2022, at Denville Hall in Northwood, London, at the age of 80, after complications related to cancer. His passing closed a career that stretched across more than 200 roles in film, television, and voice acting. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at around $8 million, earned through decades of work that made him one of Britain's most recognizable character actors. Tony Haygarth as Heinz Müller. Anthony Tony Haygarth was born on February 4, 1945 in Liverpool, England. At 33 years old, he played Heinz Müller, a conflicted German soldier torn between loyalty and conscience in Holocaust, 1978. The role added a layer of moral conflict to the series, showing how ordinary men were trapped inside the machinery of war. His personal life, however, carried tensions of its own. Haygarth married Carol Winter, and together they raised 2 daughters, but the pressures of a demanding acting career slowly strained the marriage. While appearing in productions such as A Bridge Too Far, 1977, and later television successes like Where the Heart Is, the relationship weakened and eventually ended in divorce. In later years, a cruel illness began to steal the sharp mind that had built his career. Haygarth developed Alzheimer's disease, and the condition progressed slowly but relentlessly, affecting his memory and independence. Even as the illness advanced, audiences still remembered his warmth from roles in projects like Chicken Run, 2000, and the sitcom Ever-Decreasing Circles. Tony Haygarth died on March 10, 2017, at his home in Royal Tunbridge Wells, Kent, at the age of 72, from complications related to Alzheimer's disease. His passing marked the quiet end of a long and respected career in British theatre, television, and film. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at around $2 million, earned from decades of steady acting work. George Rose as Franz Lowy. George Walter Rose was born on February 19, 1920, in Bicester, Oxfordshire, England. At 58 years old, he played Franz Lowy, the gentle Jewish neighbor who briefly brings humanity into the tragedy of Holocaust, 1978. His warm performance softened one of the series' darkest storylines. But the quiet kindness on screen hid a life moving toward a shocking ending. Rose grew up in rural England as the son of a butcher, surrounded by the economic anxiety of the years between 2 world wars. Theater became his escape. After studying at the Central School of Speech and Drama, he joined the Old Vic and quickly developed a reputation for sharp comedic timing. Films such as A Night to Remember, 1958, and later A New Leaf, 1971, slowly built his reputation, yet the stage remained his true kingdom. Success, however, never brought him the family life he secretly wanted. Rose never married and had no long-term partner, a loneliness that followed him even while he was winning Tony Awards for My Fair Lady and The Mystery of Edwin Drood. Late in life, he tried to change that fate. In the 1980s, he adopted a teenage boy in the Dominican Republic, believing he had finally found the heir and family he had longed for. The decision turned into the most terrifying chapter of his life. In 1988, during a break from touring The Mystery of Edwin Drood, Rose was attacked, tortured, and beaten inside his vacation home in Sosua. The attackers were his adopted son, the boy's father, and two accomplices. They tried to disguise the murder as a car accident, but the truth quickly surfaced. George Rose died on May 5, 1988, at the age of 68 in Sosua, Dominican Republic. The murder stunned the theater world. He was buried in an unmarked grave near his home, a tragic contrast to the standing ovations he once received on Broadway. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $4 million, earned through decades of stage, film, and musical success. Robert Stevens as Uncle Kurt Dorff. Robert Graham Stevens was born on July 14, 1931, in Bristol, England. At 47 years old, he played Uncle Kurt Dorff, a calculating Nazi official entangled in power and ideology in Holocaust, 1978. His performance added tension and moral darkness to the series. Yet the real drama in Stevens' life happened far away from the camera. His childhood carried quiet instability. Stevens grew up in a working-class household and watched his parents' strained relationship fracture the family early. Acting became his escape. After training at Bradford Civic Theatre School, he rose quickly through the British stage world and joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, appearing in productions that later led to films like The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, 1970. But his personal life was a storm. Stevens married 4 times. His brief first marriage to Nora Ann Simmons collapsed almost immediately. A second marriage to Tarn Bassett ended a decade later. His most famous relationship came with legendary actress Maggie Smith, whom he married in 1967. They had 2 sons, Toby Stevens and Chris Larkin, yet the marriage imploded under the weight of Stevens's heavy drinking and emotional instability, ending in divorce in 1975. Alcohol slowly destroyed his health. Years of addiction led to serious liver damage and repeated breakdowns, nearly ending his career. Even while appearing in films like Empire of the Sun, 1987, and returning triumphantly to Shakespeare roles such as Falstaff, his body was deteriorating. Doctors warned him repeatedly that the damage was irreversible. Robert Stevens died on November 12, 1995, in London at the age of 64, following complications during surgery linked to long-term illness and alcohol-related liver damage. The tragedy was sharpened by timing. He had been knighted earlier that same year for services to drama. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at around $3 million, a modest fortune compared to the turbulent brilliance of the career he left behind. Charles Korvin as Dr. Cohn. Charles Korvin was born Geza Karpati on November 21, 1907, in Piešťany, Austro-Hungary, now Slovakia. At 70 years old, he played Dr. Cohn, the gentle Jewish colleague whose quiet compassion adds humanity to the suffering in Holocaust, 1978. Though not the central figure, his calm presence deepened the emotional reality of the series. That calm voice came from a life shaped by upheaval. Born into a Jewish family in Central Europe, Korvin grew up watching political hatred slowly spread across the continent. The threat of fascism forced him to leave Europe and eventually settle in the United States. Before becoming an actor, he worked as a photographer during the Spanish Civil War, even co-directing the anti-Franco documentary Heart of Spain. Later, he moved into acting and appeared in films such as Enter Arsène Lupin, 1944, and Ship of Fools, 1965. His private life was quieter but still complex. Korvin married Anne, and the couple divided their lives between New York and the Swiss resort town of Klosters, where artists and intellectuals gathered. Their circle included figures like Greta Garbo and Deborah Kerr. Despite the glamorous company, Korvin preferred the kitchen to the spotlight. Friends often said he could cook with the precision of a professional chef, and legendary culinary icon Julia Child once named him her favorite amateur cook. Age eventually slowed him down. In his later years, Korvin struggled with declining health and complications associated with advanced age, though he remained mentally sharp and socially active. Even after stepping away from major acting roles, he continued photography and maintained friendships across the artistic world. Charles Korvin died on June 18, 1998, in New York at the age of 90, after complications related to age-related illness. His life had crossed wars, political persecution, and decades of artistic work in Europe and America. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at around $3 million, earned through acting, photography, and creative projects that reflected an unusually versatile life. Stanley Lebor as Zalman. Stanley Harvey Lebor was born September 24, 1934, in East Ham, London, England. At 44 years old, he played Zalman, a determined member of the Jewish community struggling to survive in Holocaust, 1978. His performance added emotional tension, showing the courage of ordinary people trapped in extraordinary terror. Lebor's early years were marked by the scars of wartime London. Growing up among bomb sites and working-class hardship, he saw destruction long before stepping on a stage. Acting became his escape. After studying at RADA, he began appearing in British television dramas and gradually built a reputation as a dependable character actor. Films such as A Bridge Too Far, 1977, and later Flash Gordon, 1980, expanded his presence on screen. Unlike many actors whose personal lives became tabloid stories, Lebor guarded his family life carefully. He married and built a quiet home life away from cameras while continuing steady television work. During the same period, he became widely recognized by British audiences for his role as Howard Hughes in the sitcom Ever-Decreasing Circles, a performance that revealed his gift for subtle comedy. In later years, however, his health began to decline. Lebor developed serious cardiovascular problems, which gradually weakened him after decades of working in film, theater, and television. The illness forced him to step away from acting, ending a career that had quietly lasted more than 40 years. Stanley Lebor died on November 22, 2014, in Faversham, Kent, England at the age of 80, following complications related to heart disease. His passing closed the career of a respected British character actor whose work stretched from wartime dramas to television comedy. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at around $1 million, the result of decades of steady work across British film and television. Rosemary Harris as Berta Palitz-Weiss. Rosemary Ann Harris was born on September 19, 1927, in Ashby-de-la-Zouch, England. At 50 years old, she played Berta Palitz-Weiss, the gentle mother holding her family together as everything collapses in Holocaust, 1978. Her performance didn't just add warmth, it made the grief feel personal, like you were watching a real mother lose the world inch by inch. That tenderness was forged in an unsettled childhood. With a father in the Royal Air Force, Harris spent her early years moving. The constant shifting built a quiet steel in her, and she hid inside, acting the way other kids hide inside books. By the time she reached the stage, she wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing control, and roles like Eleanor of Aquitaine in The Lion in Winter proved she could dominate a room without raising her voice. Then her love life turned into its own script. Harris married actor-director Ellis Rabb in 1959, building a theater marriage that looked perfect in playbills but cracked behind closed doors. They divorced in 1967. Not long after, she married writer John Ayle, and their life shifted away from the spotlight into a quieter, intellectual world in North Carolina. Yet even there, the family story stayed intense, with their daughter Jennifer Eel growing up to become a star too. Around the same era, Harris kept working through heavy material, projects like The Boys from Brazil, 1978. Age brought another kind of pressure. Not scandal, but survival. In a business that discards older women, Harris kept returning, refusing to fade out. She pushed into later life roles that reminded audiences of her power, from the aching prestige of Tom and Viv, 1994, to the global spotlight as Aunt May in Spider-Man, 2002 to 2007. The wear and tear wasn't announced with headlines, but the schedule, the travel, the decades of stage intensity were their own quiet battle. In 2026, she is 99 years old, still recognized as a living pillar of stage and screen, and she has continued making selective appearances even in her 90s, proving she never needed constant visibility to remain unforgettable. Her net worth is estimated around $5 million, built slowly through a lifetime of theater, awards, and late-career mainstream hits. Tovah Feldshuh as Helena Slomova. Tovah Feldshuh was born on December 27, 1948, in New York City, United States. At 29 years old, she played Helena Slomova, a brave prisoner who refuses to be erased in Holocaust, 1978. Her performance hit like a warning shot. This wasn't just history, it was terror with a heartbeat. Her childhood wasn't tragic in the obvious way, but it carried its own pressure, growing up in a Jewish household. She trained early, worked relentlessly, and learned to sharpen her voice as a weapon. That discipline later fueled a career that could swing from raw drama to big stage electricity, eventually leading to landmark theater success like Golda's Balcony and screen work that reached new audiences. Her marriage became the rare thing in show business, steady, but not easy. Feldshuh married attorney Andrew Harris Levy in 1977, right as her career was taking off, and they stayed together while she lived inside, demanding roles and constant travel. She had 2 children, Garson and Amanda, and she later gave her daughter blunt marriage advice that sounded almost brutal because it was honest. Sometimes you close one eye and keep going. That line hits harder when you realize she was balancing family life while also becoming a familiar face on TV, including Law and Order. However, Feldshuh has repeatedly chased the edge of what her body can do, like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro later in life after losing her mother, as if grief pushed her into proving she was still alive. That same drive showed up when she joined The Walking Dead, stepping into a violent, fictional world without flinching, because she has never built her career on comfort. In 2026, she is 78 years old, still active, still performing, still choosing projects that keep her sharp rather than safe. Her net worth is estimated around $5 million, earned through decades of Broadway dominance, television longevity, and touring work. James Woods as Carl Weiss. James Howard Woods was born on April 18, 1947, in Vernal, Utah, United States. At 31 years old, he played Carl Weiss, the Jewish artist whose life is slowly crushed by the Nazi machine in Holocaust, 1978. His ferocious, nervous energy made Carl feel dangerously real, like a man creating beauty while the world is trying to erase him. That intensity didn't come from nowhere. Woods lost his father in 1960 after what was supposed to be routine surgery, and the shock reshaped the entire household. His mother later remarried, and Woods grew up carrying grief that never really had a place to go. He entered MIT aiming for a serious future, but the pressure cooker inside him pushed toward the stage instead. He dropped out one semester before graduating and threw himself into acting. Early roles in Night Moves and The Onion Field weren't just career steps. They were proof he could turn anger into art. Then came the part the public rarely expects, the chaos of his marriages. In 1980, he married costume designer Catherine Morrison Pahoa, and it ended in divorce in 1983, fast, sharp, and reportedly bruising. In 1989, he married Sarah Owen, a 26-year-old equestrian and boutique owner, and the marriage collapsed in 4 months, a blink that turned into a headline. The whiplash didn't stop there. His dating life spilled into controversy, including a public legal war with actress Sean Young after the boost. Illness didn't hit him first, it hit his family, and the aftermath haunted him. In 2006, his younger brother, Michael Jeffrey Woods, died suddenly from cardiac arrest at 49, and Woods responded the only way he knew: legal action, alleging medical negligence. Around the same era, Woods became known for living with constant tension, lawsuits over defamation, bitter disputes, and the kind of stress that keeps a person permanently braced for impact. Even while working, he kept choosing roles that sounded like warning sirens, from Salvador, 1986, to later projects that fed his reputation as a man who could explode in a single line. In 2026, he is 79 years old, still a headline-making figure, dividing his time between selective screen work and a surprisingly intense second arena, competitive poker. His net worth is estimated around $6 million, built from decades of high-voltage films, television awards, and steady income streams beyond acting. Michael Moriarty as Eric Dorff. Michael Moriarty was born on April 5, 1941 in Detroit, Michigan, United States. At 37 years old, he played Eric Dorff, the SS officer whose ambition turns him into a willing engine of evil in Holocaust, 1978. His performance was unsettling because it didn't rely on monsters. It showed how an ordinary man can become terrifying by choice. The cracks began early. Moriarty's parents divorced when he was 11, splitting his childhood into two worlds and leaving him searching for stability through discipline. He studied at Dartmouth and trained at RADA in London, building a polished exterior that looked unshakable. But even as his career rose, films like Bang the Drum Slowly and later the steady fame of Law and Order, there was always a restless edge underneath, like he was arguing with something no one else could see. That internal storm spilled into his relationships. Moriarty married ballet dancer Françoise Martinet in 1966. They had a son, then divorced in 1978. The same year, he married Anne Hamilton Martin, and that marriage lasted until 1997 before collapsing too. He married Susana Cabrita in 1998 and divorced in 1999, another blink of a marriage. Then came the most alarming chapter: his volatile relationship with manager Margaret Britchka, which ended with an assault charge in 2000. Moriarty entered alcohol treatment, the legal proceedings were paused, and the couple later reunited. Addiction and controversy became the shadow that followed him. Moriarty later admitted he had been a very bad drunk, and his battles with alcoholism overlapped with career turbulence, including his explosive exit from Law and Order in 1994. Instead of fading away, he went into what looked like self-imposed exile, moving to Canada, calling himself a political exile, while continuing to write, perform jazz, and stay fiercely outspoken. In 2026, he is 85 years old, living a quieter life compared to his earlier public clashes, still known as a rare hybrid, award-winning actor and serious jazz musician. His net worth is estimated around $5 million, earned from decades of television, film, theater, and music projects. The actors of Holocaust, 1978, helped bring one of the darkest chapters of human history to the screen. Behind the performances were real stories of loss, illness, broken relationships, and the relentless passage of time. Which member of the Holocaust cast had the most tragic ending? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories behind classic Hollywood legends.